Sarah, I want to begin by telling you I had Speaker Johnson on earlier this hour, and we've gone through our opinion that this is going to uh, put a fire under the Republican base, not unlike that, in fact, greater than that, which happened to the Democratic base after Dobbs. Have you heard that from other Republicans?
Absolutely. I mean, anecdotally speaking to sources all through last night, there's a sense of energy that it's hard to compare to anything that I've sort of picked up before. I mean, this is completely united congressional Republicans. They were all sort of critical of this before, but I think even Republicans in Congress who are not normally associated with Trump, who are in fact Trump critics, like Senator Susan Collins from Maine, are standing up and saying, this is unjust. What's being done is unfair. This is not the country that we live in. So I think in a lot of ways, this could help paper over any remaining Republican divisions with voters in Congress and really energize and unite that base going into the election.
I agree with that. Now, let me ask a lot of Democrats have been pushing the absurd argument that Justice Alito has to recuse himself because of his wife's flag. Have you talked to anyone who's made that argument yet and asked them whether or not that standard of recusal would have recused Judge Merchan here?
I saw your tweet about that. I thought that was such a good point, right? Because Alito is not tied in any way to any conduct that constitutes, something that shows partiality. Whereas Judge Merchant here is a Joe Biden donor, even though it's a small amount. The fact that he felt strongly enough that Trump shouldn't win in 2020, that he, overrode those concerns, risked getting an ethics censure in New York to donate to Joe Biden, kind of shows how conflicted he was in this whole affair. I wonder if this will silence some of the Democratic critics, that and some other developments in Flaggate. But there's a lot of pressure within the Democratic Party to delegitimize the Supreme Court, because I do think they see where this is headed. A lot of this lawfare stuff is just going to end with the Supreme Court putting a stop to it over the next year or so.
Do you think it will impact? Has anyone brought up the fact that the court has the immunity case for presidential immunity in front of it? Do you think this rogue case and this miscarriage of justice will impact the court's decision?
You know, I think it was pretty clear during the oral arguments for this that the justices were leaning towards carving out some sort of immunity for official duties, or some sort of test for the appellate courts to apply in those types of cases. But I do wonder in the draft opinion now if there will be any allusion to this sort of situation, because the whole idea of presidential immunity was cooked up by legal scholars for exactly this sort of situation, right? To protect against rogue prosecutions that don't really have any legal basis, that are sort of twisted into being by prosecutors. That's the whole reason why this concept of presidential immunity exists in the first place. And so while it might not be as applicable to this Manhattan case, because it deals with actions that happened that got set into motion before Trump was president, I do wonder if this will be sort of a cautionary tale that's raised in the draft opinion that is expected to carve out some sort of immunity.
Justice Barrett did mention rogue state prosecutors in the course of her questioning of the lawyers during the presentation, but the conduct complained of here actually happened in 2016. I do think they might say, look what happened. A local rogue prosecutor went back 5 years to before he was president in order to cripple his run for reelection. I think they will have to bring it up, or they will be they'll appear indifferent to the slaughter of justice here.
Right. And I mean, there's other reasons why, if this appeal makes it to the Supreme Court, and some folks like Mark Levin have made the argument that potentially Trump's appeals team should seek some sort of expedited review from the Supreme Court. But there are other grounds that aren't even as novel as presidential immunity, just like some basic constitutional rights having to do with the accused getting to know what crimes they're being accused of by prosecutors. So I think this is a really ripe ground for the Supreme Court to get to it. The problem is that the Supreme Court hasn't shown an appetite to rush Trump things necessarily. Jack Smith has tried to rush his Trump prosecutions to get.
Oh, I don't think Mark is correct. I think Mark is a brilliant lawyer, but it would not be prudent to go direct to the Supreme Court, because I think it would be a loss. They're going to let the New York courts try and correct the New York error first. Sarah, let me conclude with this. How do you plan to spend your day? Will any Democrats talk on the record about the judge's problems and the failure to specify in the indictment the admission of the guilty pleas of Cohen and Peck, all the various grounds of appeal that we know? Do you think Democrats will speak to those today?
I really don't. I think after gloating about all the indictments for a year, after, celebrating the fact that Trump was going through this trial process, what we heard from Democrats last night was, it's the rule of law, it's not political, I'm not going to weigh in, because I think maybe the shock of this conviction was sort of surprising to Democrats. I think maybe they might realize that this could backfire on them. And so now you see the White House, you see Democrats trying to act like this is not political. They don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. I think it's too late to give that impression, though.
Last quick question. Do you think it'll impact the selection of vice president so that a Cotton or a Pompeo, a trained lawyer, is opposite Kamala Harris when she babbles on about this?
I think it'll definitely make Trump want a pit bull in that position.